So Gideon of the Ninth and Harrow of the Ninth are pretty popular books on BookTube and Book Talk, but you hear a lot how this book series isn't for everybody and that some people really don't like it. And since I just finished Harrow of the Ninth, I'm going to attempt to explain why someone might not like this book. So Harrow of the Ninth and Gideon of the Ninth are kind of their own separate beasts, which is kind of amazing. So my reasonings are going to apply to both, but mostly to Harrow because that's the book I just finished. So don't read this book if you don't like unlikable characters. I personally don't find them unlikable, but I could see why someone would find them unlikable. If you need lawfully good characters or you need noble characters, this probably isn't for you. Don't read this if you don't like unreliable narrators. Harrow thinks she's going crazy, so there's a lot of weird stuff going on around her and she can't really trust anything that she's thinking. Don't read this series if you don't like non-linear timelines. If you like the events of a book to be chronological, then don't read this. If you prefer fantasy books that are considered hard fantasy or have a lot of rules that dictate how the magic works, you probably won't like this series. AKA, think of like Brandon Sanderson, where every single magical thing has like a rule for it. There are rules in Harrow of the Ninth, but we're not really privy to them all. There's scientific explanations, but we don't really know all of them. So the magic tends to feel a little more loosey-goosey. And if you like sci-fi where the science part plays a really big part of the science fiction novel, you probably won't like this. This is definitely fantasy science fiction, and the science fiction part is definitely more like a space opera-y kind of a thing. So we kind of know how things work, but there aren't like a lot of scientific explanations for everything. If you are at all squeamish about body horror, gore, violence, body possession, necrophilia, or at least discussions of that, and just necromancy in general, you won't like this series. It's pretty heavily dealt with. It's pretty gory and violent. It's not the goriest thing I read, but it is body horror, so it's very close to your perspective. And the biggest one for this series is the writing style. If at first you don't like the writing style in Gideon, you're not going to like it in Harrow. I wouldn't say that the prose is entirely purple, but it does have a very stylistic sense to it, and you will notice it when reading. So if you prefer your fantasy books to have a very simple style, or just a style that kind of blends into the background of you reading the book, then you probably are not going to like this prose. And so those are some of the deterrents of why you might not like this series, so let me know if this is helpful at all. Over the weekend, I finished She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan, and it completely lived up to the hype for me. I absolutely adored this. I loved it so much. So far, it is one of the standout books that I read this year, but today I'm going to be talking about some of the reasons why someone might not like this book. If you don't like a book with a lot of politics or military strategy, this probably isn't going to be the book for you. There is a lot of people just standing around, thinking and strategizing and trying to figure out what the other side is going to do. And it's also a lot about the characters trying to figure out what their side is going to do because they have political nemesis on their own side. If you like your fantasies to have a lot of magic in them, this probably isn't for you. There is spiritualism and a little bit of magic, but it is not a deep set magical fantasy novel. I would say this is a historical fiction novel first and then a fantasy novel second. And that fantasy novel-esque thing that you're going to get is, again, mostly the political strategy versus any kind of magic. If you don't like flawed characters where there's a lot of deep internal struggle, you're probably not gonna like this. Both of the main characters hate themselves in some respect, and there is a lot of internalized homophobia, transphobia, and there's a lot of internal angst and just morally gray characters making bad decisions or thinking bad things. The characters, in my opinion, make the correct decisions, but they don't always make the morally correct decision. And finally, if you don't like a story that's set over a long period of time, over many years and many months, this probably isn't going to be the book for you. This book, a lot of people would probably say, has a slow start. We cover a lot of years setting up to get to the main action of the story. So if you like a story that is set over a short period of time, or you like a story that is set directly in the action, this probably isn't going to be for you. We're set directly in a moment of conflict, a moment of turmoil, but it is not the main action of the book necessarily. We really do follow one of the main characters' lives coming up to the big events of the story. So this book might not end up being for everybody, but it definitely worked for me. I really loved following these characters and just seeing their internal angst as they come into their own. It was really fabulous. If you like morally gray characters and sympathetic villains, this is going to be for you because this has all of that. And it's gay. Very gay, which is a thumbs up for me. Earlier in the month, I finished Fevered Star, which is the sequel to Black Sun and the second book in the Between the Earth and Sky series, all by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is an adult fantasy, and I've really enjoyed the immersive world and the characters in it. So as a way to help decide if you're going to pick it up, I'm going to talk about all the reasons why someone might not like Black Sun. The number one reason I would say someone might not like Black Sun is because it is a slow-moving series. A lot of this book and the second book is just following the moving parts of the story. You're following the people as they travel to their destinations to have the big conflict. There is action in this series and there are little conflicts along the way, but a lot of it is just traveling to a destination in anticipation of a bigger action sequence. Another reason not to pick up Black Sun is if you do not like multiple perspective stories. I don't suffer from this problem, but other reviewers I've seen do not like all of the perspectives in Black Sun, and that people tend to favor certain characters, and because of that, other parts of the story drag because they don't necessarily like following every single character in the story. Another reason not to read is if you don't like a slow reveal of information. You start the book kind of knowing the main character's motivations for things, but you don't necessarily know why everything else is moving around these characters. It seems that there are bigger things at play and that there are more important people kind of moving our main characters around in the plot, and we don't necessarily know why they're doing these things or what ends they have. Another big reason not to read Black Sun is if you don't like political-leaning fantasy novels. This is a big political and thus a big talking fantasy novel. In this book, there are a lot of different cities and clans, all with their own political agenda, and so a lot of the book is just the different alliances, the different enemies, just talking things out and scheming. I wouldn't compare this book to Game of Thrones, but I can see some similarities in that kind of a lot of different clans or groups of people that have different motivations and goals. Another reason not to read Black Sun is if you need a lush fantasy setting. This world is fleshed out, but you're only going to get just enough to understand the world. It's not going to wax on and on poetically about the locations. And the last reason not to read Black Sun is if you need a lot of magic in your fantasy worlds. There is some magic, some characters do use it, but not a lot. Hope this helped.